And I'm going to put the link here of the Zoom meeting in case there's anyone that you know that needs it. And you can share it with them as well. Okay. Okay. I'm going to be on in 2 minutes.
Hi, Kaya. Good to see you. Put your mic on.
I'm in the middle of making wacky mac. How are you?
Okay. Nice to be back.
Yes, nice to be back. Nice to see you at your home setting. I don't want to overtake from the class or Tanya's time. So enjoy the class. But there's 1 minute left. I'm sure she'll be here soon. I saw she's on. Enjoy
Okay.
the class.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Wow, lots and lots of you on the Zoom. Very exciting to see everyone. Um, I can see that you've spotlighted me, but I'm going to remove the spotlight shortly once we start. Because okay, so first and foremost, welcome. Wonderful to have you all here. I am very excited to see all my students from last year, and it's fabulous to see so many of you. I'm going to ask specifically because this is a class that is more of kind of a Bet Midrash class. It's more of a kind of group discussion class rather than a lecture. It's going to be really, really important for me that people put their cameras on. Um, I'm gonna say from the start because I know I'm sure that there are people here that are trying the class out over the next 2 weeks. So I'm gonna have full disclosure about what the class is going to be and the kind of the design of the class, the aspiration of the class, and the drishot, the expectations of the class, which are going to be really, really important. The Let me start from the beginning. Baruch Hashem, I'm privileged and fortunate enough to have lectured for Matan for over 20 years. I started at Matan HaSharon as a one of their kind of matmidot, one of their students, and for about 7 years on and off, 8 years even, I was learning in their Bet Midrash, and then around the second or third year, I was given my first job teaching in Zichron Yaakov. And from there, over the last 18, 20 years, I've taught at many, many different Matan locations, including Yerushalayim, which was really a fabulous experience, just too far for me to travel at this stage in my life. So instead, Chaya, and I think I heard her on the Zoom, I'm not sure if she's still here, asked me if I would give a lecture over Zoom. And we actually decided that it would be what we're calling really a reading group. And the reading group is, and I'm going to explain to you the way the reading group works. The reading group is essentially a model that I brought into Matan about 4 years ago at Matan in Ranana. Just asking people to mute just for the minute until we open up. Okay. It was a model that we bought into Matan Ranana. And it's been one of, I would say it's kind of something that I'm super proud of. And that is that we take books. We began it reading philosophy, then we did a year of Rabbi Sachs. This year we're going back to philosophy in my reading group in person. We take books and we unpack them together. Now, the aim of it is twofold. The aim is number one for us to really grapple and get a real hold on the things we're reading, not just to have it spoon-fed, but to actually grapple with the books, grapple with the ideas, have to open up books and read them ourselves and commit, and this is really part of it, commit ourselves to reading at least 2 or 3 chapters a week of a book, of a philosophical book, which is not always easy. And sometimes it's a challenge. And I think today more than ever, when we're all grappling with focus and with time and many different things, it's a challenge. But it's a challenge, I believe, that bears enormous fruits. And those of you that have been with me over the last year in our reading group, and I see many of you have returned, which is a testament to the power of the group that we had, you have all said to me how much you gained and how cathartic it was, and how I don't know, like an intellectual journey it's been, as well as not just an intellectual journey, but also a spiritual journey. So I really sell it in that way. This is not going to be a lecture where you're going to just simply sit on the Zoom and listen to me. The aim of this is that we create a space for dialogue, that we create a space where we're going to share together. It's going to be slightly more challenging because there's definitely more people here than there were last year. Again, some of you are going to say this isn't for me, and that's totally fine. It's not going to be for everyone. It's not what everyone wants. But the point here is that we really find a space for mutual I guess, respect, because there's going to be many different opinions. We find a space for dialogue where we hear each other's voices, and we find a space for what I call um, a communal journey to truth. Okay, that's where truth doesn't just come from one place, but it comes from many different voices to build it together. So that's really the aim of this kind of Bet Midrash learning. Doing it on Zoom is much more of a challenge, and that's why there's a few things I ask. Okay, there's kind of 3 basic things I ask. Number one, I really ask that there's a commitment to the reading, because when you come in and you've read what I've told you to read, you're going to be able to gain far more. The more you read, the more you delve into the reading, the more you're going to gain from the discussion, the more you're going to gain from the classes. The second thing I ask is that as much as possible, and I know it's not always possible, but as much as possible to have your cameras open. It's really important that we see people's faces, that we're hearing people who are speaking and we're seeing them. Especially in this class, because it really is meant to be an immersive Bet Midrash experience. And the only way we can do that over Zoom is when we see each other. We see people's reactions. We understand what people's faces are saying. We can't always hear each other because, I'm going to ask you to open your mics and we don't want the background noise. But really, to be able to see each other is really important. And the third thing is a commitment to coming to the classes. Now, in I teach a few different classes at my time. In the other classes, which are really lecture based, in some ways, and I'll be honest, it doesn't really matter if you're present, if you've got your camera off, or if you're watching the YouTube recording. Because especially in the hybrid classes, I'm not seeing the people on Zoom. I'm seeing the people in the room, but I'm not seeing the people on Zoom. This class, it's imperative for me that everyone is present. Now, of course, life is complicated. We all have things we have to go. People are traveling, people have appointments, people have kids, people have commitments, a million different things. And I'm never going to, it's not going to be one of those things where I'm going to take the register. Of course not. Okay. But for your sake, more even than, I mean, definitely for mine, because I love seeing all of you and I love hearing from you all. But for your sake, it really to have a commitment to coming and being present in this Bet Midrash setting over Zoom is really important. So as much as possible, and maybe even because it is on Zoom, please try to be in the class itself. So those are the three things: camera on, being present, and trying to commit yourself to coming to the Zoom itself. Okay, those are three things that really are the expectations. So we've spoken about the goals, we've spoken about the expectations, the aspiration. What is the aspiration of the class? To me, the aspiration of the class, and you know, I'm not going to put anyone here on the spot. If there are people that have been in the class last year, I'm sure if you open your mic and share your own experiences, a lot of them will sound similar. And I hope the aspirations are the same for the people in the class that have been there and understand. The aspiration to me, again, is kind of three-tiered. Number one, that we gain wisdom. Okay, that through our journey together, we're reading Rabbi Sacks's books, we're going to gain a deeper, more profound understanding and wisdom of Rabbi Sacks. Okay, that's like the most basic level. The second level is that we are going to understand Rabbi Sacks at a much deeper level. Okay, we're going to really unpack him. We're going to understand the connections that he's making. We're going to understand the philosophical underpinnings of his work. That's the part. It's the intellectual part. Well, okay, it's very nice. A lot of us read Rabbi Sacks, but really, can we really grapple with the philosophical implications of his thought, the philosophical underpinnings of his thought? What is he drawing on? Is he drawing on existentialism? Is he drawing on Kant's philosophy? What does that mean? Why is he drawing that philosophical school of thought at this point? Why is he relating to it that point? What is going on here, and how does it intersect with his much wider thought, with his much wider philosophy? Okay, so number one is to gain Rabbi Sacks's wisdom on a basic level. Number two is to understand Rabbi Sacks's philosophy in relation to the intersection with other philosophical schools of thought and with his thought itself. And the third thing, and for me, this is the most important thing. The third thing is, how does it meet me in my life? Whenever I teach, whether it's Torah narratives, whether it's philosophy, whether it's even in an academic setting, I do not believe that anything we learn will touch us deeply unless it touches our lives. And today, more than ever, we are at a momentous and, I would say, unprecedented moment in our national history. It is, I don't know why this keeps turning off, this light. Okay, I'm very dark for you though, which is a little bit annoying. It is it is very overwhelming. At times, it can feel almost like the ground is being pulled or the carpet is being pulled from under our feet. And we're grappling. We're trying to find windows of inspiration, windows of meaning, things that allow us to wake up in the morning, things that allow us to get on with our day, things that allow us to continue functioning, because functioning can also be really difficult. You know, when I started this, I'm sorry, this light is having a problem. Okay, I'm going to be hold on, let me just turn the light on in the room. Okay. When I started this course last year, we were literally on the heels of 710, and you know, when we started the course, all of us were in shock. And I remember saying, you know, please God, this time next year we'll be in a different place. And we're not in a different place. And it's heartbreaking and it's heart-wrenching. But the point of my teaching this year is to allow each of us to find those windows of catharsis, of inspiration, of meaning in what is really a fractured reality. And that's the third aspiration. And I want to tell you that I really believe that this space that we have, this what I call this kind of group learning, this Bet Midrash, virtual Bet Midrash, I really believe that in taking Rabbi Sacks's work, in understanding the messages that he is bringing to us, I believe that we will all find those windows. We will all find those cracks where we can bring the light through. Okay, so that's the third element, the aspirations and the three-pronged, the way in which this class is going to direct us. So, given the intro, we're going to jump in. What I want to do is to introduce you, to give an introduction to Rabbi Sacks, to who he was, to his thoughts. Those of you that were with me last year and 2 years ago, you're going to forgive me. There are a couple of things that we are going to, that we're going to be doing again. I've done it in a slightly different format this time, and I've brought in different sources, so there are new things, but you'll just be patient with me because there's plenty of people here that obviously haven't had this introduction. I want to begin from a personal perspective. Rabbi Sacks, as we all know, and I'm sure many people are on this Zoom because they've heard of Rabbi Sacks, because they like Rabbi Sacks, because they want to learn more about him. But I will say that learning more about Rabbi Sacks, there's two ways to learn about Rabbi Sacks. One way is to simply pick up his books, and specifically his Parshanut, which many people do, his commentary on Parshat HaShavua, and to learn him yourself. And the beauty of Rabbi Sacks is that you can do that. You don't need someone to guide you. You don't need someone to channel your learning. You don't need someone to give you the background. What makes him such a great thinker is that he can be read by a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old. He can be read by a total layperson and a very high academic in an ivory tower. And he will speak to all of those people and to all of those places and to all of those spaces. So you don't need this course to learn Rabbi Sacks, okay? But what I will say is that in order to gain a more profound and deeper understanding of Rabbi Sacks, to really mine the depths of what he's saying and where he's coming from, to understand him on a different plane and in a different level, I really believe that this class will do that for you. I hope it will. That's the hope. And by us bringing our own learning, our understanding of Rabbi Sacks and discussing it, it will also take us even one step higher. Rabbi Sacks was my teacher. I literally grew up, I would say, like, I grew up with him, meaning that when I was a Bnei Akiva Chanicha in the Bnei Akiva sniff in London, he would come and speak to us, all the Chanichim. He was really part and parcel of my life. He was the chief rabbi as much as I remember. He became chief rabbi in 1991. I'll give my age away. I was at the time 12 years old. So really, he grew up with me, okay? When I became a university student and I went to university in central London, I remember very clearly going to his public lectures. I met him on numerous occasions. When I asked for a meeting with him, I was actually just interviewing his daughter, Gila Sachs, for Please God, a podcast on his books, which I'm launching shortly in the next month. Very, very exciting project, which I'll tell you about in the coming few weeks when we're learning together. So I was interviewing Gila, and Gila, by the way, I also had a chevruta with. I say had a chevruta, I was meant to be teaching her, but really she taught me. I came as a student and I taught her when she was in school. And I remember so clearly that I walked away thinking she's taught me far more than I've taught her. So we were friends for many, many years, and we kind of lost contact, but we were in contact here and there. Gila is brilliant in her own right, absolutely brilliant. But I remember that she said to me that what amazed them when they sat Shiva was that they realized that Rabbi Sacks made time for every single person. It didn't matter who they were and in what walk of life they were and at what stage of life they were. He made time for every person that turned to him. And I said to her that, it blew my mind to know. And I think about the fact that who was I, Tanya White? I was a young kid, at the time. And I asked to have a meeting with him, and he took an hour out of his day, his very, very busy schedule. And if you look, the legacy he left us, the written legacy that he left us, this was a guy who did not stop. Okay. I don't know when he wrote his books. I know when he did half the things he did. And on top of that, he made an hour for a random Tanya White to come and sit with him and discuss her theological problems. A 20-year-old, a 19-year-old, however old I was at the time. Okay, this is testament to not just his philosophy, which you're going to see is groundbreaking in many ways, but also to the person that he was. He believed that he was a leader that needed to create more leaders. And he did that with every person that he met. He invested in them, or he almost gave them, he spurred them on to leadership. And that's what I took from him on many occasions. And as we go on throughout the years, I'll tell you some more stories. He really, I would say the meetings with him were totally formative for me in my own personal life trajectory. So I'm going to share screen now. No, that is not what I want to share with you. 1 second. Neither is that. Where is it? 1 sec. One second, I'm stopping share. It's not working for me. Yeah. Sorry. Why is this not working? All right, let's try this. Can everyone see it? Just tell me you can.
Yes.
Yes, now we can.
Can you see it as full screen?
Yes, we see it
You can see it as full screen.
now.
It's not full screen.
It's not full screen?
We see you on the side. It's a full screen. It's a full screen.
Okay, great, fine. Okay, so I want to just give you a little bit of an introduction into who he was. Let me also just tell you that the format of the class today is not typical of the general format of the class. The general format of the class is going to be that we are going to read the book during the week. We're going to come together and we're going to discuss it. I will always give an introduction. I will always be giving you an outline and channeling you and giving you the kind of underpinnings of what's going on in each part of the book. We will then have various discussions about it. I will then bring in more insights. It's going to be a dynamic whereby there's going to be discussion and there's going to be me bringing in things that are important for you to understand about the book. What the class today is more of a lecture because I'm kind of giving you an outline of Rabbi Sachs. Next week, please God, we're going to already be jumping into some discussion. Okay, so Rabbi Sachs, why am I not? Okay. This is not working for me. I don't understand. Okay, I'm really sorry. This has never happened that I've had this problem before. Let me try again. I don't know if it's... Oh, you know why? Okay, let's try again. I don't know what is wrong with this. This is really odd. I really, really don't. Okay, you're going to have to just bear with it as a small rather than a big, but it is a little bit annoying because I really want you to see it as
You did it.
color. Yeah, but it's not moving. I can't get it to the next slide. It's really weird. and it's not showing you everything. Which is even, okay, you can see it, but you can see it with the other slides, right? Yeah, is that right?
Now we can see it with
Yes,
the
we
other
see the other
slides.
slides on the left.
Okay, it doesn't matter. We're gonna have to just do it like this. Okay. So Rabbi Sacks, as I said, as we know, he was many different things, but I want to bring for you three different quotes that I think really summarize or express a lot of his philosophy. Number one, the Torah. For him, the Torah is central, and I'll explain to you why it's so central, because it forms the origins of his much bigger philosophy. He says like this: so long as the Jewish people never stop learning, the Jewish heart will never stop beating. Never has a people loved a book more. Never has a book sustained a people longer or lifted it higher. If you look at Rabbi Sacks's thought, and we're going to see it when we begin the book Radical, then Radical Now, you're going to see that the origins of Rabbi Sacks's philosophy, of Rabbi Sacks's idea of Judaism, his theology, is the Tanakh, is the Bible. The Bible forms the origins of much of his philosophy. Why is that important? It's important because as follows. I believe that Rabbi Sacks frames Judaism in quite a new way. And what he does when he frames it in this new way is he says to us, I am not bringing anything new. Everything that I'm saying to you, the framework that I'm using has its origins in our tradition, has its origins in the Torah. The Torah is the basis of individual freedom. The Torah is the basis of understanding how the universal and the particular work together. The Torah is the basis of understanding how we dignify the other, even though we don't necessarily agree with the other. The Torah is the basis of the way in which we understand truth in the world. The Torah is the basis to understand the world, the way the world works in terms of evil in the world. How do we understand all these big questions? Science, morality, the universal and the particular, social contract. How do we understand all of these things? How do we frame them? How do we understand modernity and tradition? What Rabbi Sacks says to us, we need to look no further than the Torah itself. It's all there. And if you look at his books, and that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the year, we're going to be looking at many of his later books, and we'll talk about that in a minute. When you look at his books, what you're going to see is that so much of what he speaks about is framed from the perspective of Torah narrative, from the perspective of Torah ideas. And this is going to be super important because what Rabbi Sacks is essentially saying to us here is, yes, it might sound, some things I say might sound radical, but they're not. I'll give you a classic example. The book we're going to first start on is the book Radical, Then Radical Now. Radical, Then Radical Now, the reason why I chose to start this book is because I believe this is the first part of the second period in Rabbi Sacks's life when his books turn outwards. Many of his books until Radical, Then Radical Now are brilliant. They're really written for the, I would say, the more, not even academic, but the more intellectual elite of the Jewish world. From Radical, Then Radical Now, there's a turn outwards where his books face the lay person. They are geared towards the lay person. And in his book, Radical, Then Radical Now, he speaks about Judaism as protest. He says that Judaism is a religion of protest. Now, again, we're going to talk about it when we get there, why this is such a radical idea. Okay. But what Rabbi Sacks says is it's not really that radical. It's radical because it sounds new to us, because in some ways over the years, Judaism had become kind of a status quo. It had almost lost its vibrancy. But I'm telling you, that's not what Judaism is meant to be. And how am I telling you? What am I using as my source base? I'm using the Torah. I'm showing you the story of Abraham is the story of Judaism as a radical call to responsibility. And so he takes the Torah narratives, uses them as the template for his greater philosophy. I want to speak about the idea of faith. Again, this is one of his most famous quotes. And I want to show you from this quote that many of us may have heard and many of us probably know. I want to show you how it forms some principal ideas in Rabbi Sacks. He says, faith is not certainty, it's courage to live with uncertainty. Faith is never easy. I'm going to stop here for a second. Why is this such a radical statement? It's radical because what Rabbi Sacks is telling us is very simple. As human beings, we all crave certainty. All of us, in some senses, all of us humans want to know what's going to happen. We want to know what's going to happen this afternoon, in the next hour. We want to have routine. We want to know that our kids are safe, that our schedules are as they should be, that things are going to be set in the way that orderly in the way that we want them to be. But the truth is that human craving for certainty and for order is met very often in the contradictory state that reality offers us uncertainty, that reality invites often disorder and chaos. And then the question is, how do we manage in that gap between our aspiration for certainty and order and the reality of disorder and uncertainty? And Rabbi Sachs is going to speak to that gap. He's especially going to speak to that gap in terms of God, in terms of religion, in terms of the way in which we live, in terms of faith. And what he says is faith is never easy. Now, again, why is this so different to what we generally, think? Because very often people, I know, for example, I've had this said to me on many occasions here in Israel. People have said to me, ze kal bishvilach, at datiya. Okay, it's easy for you, you're religious. Yesh lach et kol hatshuvot, you've got all the answers. And I actually think that many people who come from outside the religious world think that religion is in some senses what Marx called the opium of the masses, and Rabbi Sachs is going to talk about that in his book. In fact, I think a lot of the book Radical Then, Radical Now is a polemic against Marx. Okay, Marx talks about the idea that religion is an opium of the masses, meaning what? Meaning it allows us to feel comfortable and easy, to everything to be predictable, to have certainty, and to sit in that zone of, okay, now I'm comfortable because I believe that everything is okay because there's a God in the world. Rabbi Sachs wants to shake us out of our apathy, okay? And he wants to say to us, no, actually, religion is not necessarily about certainty. Religion is not necessarily about predictability. Religion is actually the courage to say, I can't prove God exists. I can't prove that tomorrow God is going to make everything okay. In fact, I don't even know that tomorrow everything is going to be okay. But religion says to me, there's something transcendent that exists in the world that is calling me to responsibility. Listen to what he says afterwards. The great heroes of the moral life, like the great artists and scientists and things, like anyone who's undertaken to live a life of high ideals, knows failure after failure, disappointment after disappointment. What made them great is that they refused to despair. The sheer wonder that God could take the risk of creating a creature with the freedom to disobey him and wreck his world. Says Rabbi Sachs, we know that humans are free, and God took a chance on us. He said, I'm creating a creature that can disobey. I'm creating a creature that can create disorder. I'm creating a creature that can create chaos, and I'm taking the risk in creating that creature. And with that risk, I'm giving him freedom. And with that freedom comes the capability of destruction as well. There is no faith humans can have in God equal to the faith God must have in humankind to place us here as guardians of the vastness and splendor of the universe. We exist because of God's faith in us. Again, I'm actually just going to stop share for a minute because I want to just invite you to speak. For those of you that want to say something, I really want to ask the question. That last sentence that Rabbi Sachs says, there is no faith greater than the faith God had in us. Does that sound to you radical? I'm just asking. In fact, maybe we'll even do a vote. Does that sentence about religion and faith, that more than the faith that we have in God is the faith that God has in us, does that sound something radical to you? Put your hand up if you think it does sound radical. By the way, you can also use your sign at the bottom, your reaction sign. Okay, so it does sound radical. Does anyone want to open up their mic and tell us why they think it's such a radical statement? First one to open gets the chance.
We always think in terms of the human to God, not God to the human. It's more logical and not radical to think in those terms.
We also realize there's faith in us.
Firstly, hi. Well, 1 minute. Firstly, hi, Chaya. Great to see you. I'm so happy you're on, even though you told me you may not be. Wonderful. Okay, so Chai is saying to us, Marsha, I'm coming to you in 1 second. Chai is saying to us that very often when we think about faith, we think about it as a kind of unilateral movement from humans to God. Okay? We look to God to save us. We look to God to help us. We pray to God. So he's, it's this kind of one direction movement from humans to God. And what Faye is saying to us is, hold on a minute, Rabbi Sachs here is saying something actually quite radical, and that is that no, there's a unilateral movement going on here from God to humans. Okay, God and humans, or I should say, even not a unilateral, sorry, a bilateral movement where there is a partnership, and we're going to come to this because the idea of partnership is super important for Rabbi Sachs, where there is a partnership happening between God and us and God, where yes, we turn to God, but more importantly, God turns to us. And what does that turning do? It leads us to have to take responsibility. Marsha, hello, Marsha, how are you?
Thank you. Wonderful to be back. Not just responsibility, but there's an intimate relationship, a quiet relationship, a dependable relationship, because we have that faith. And it's two ways. Most religions barely have one direction. So it's very radical in the world to say that God responds to us and watching us. I think it's a wonderful feeling.
I think it's beautiful, and one thing I will say is that it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's inspiring, but it can also be very um, what's the word? Intimidating. Okay, because essentially what we're saying is, oh, hold on a minute, God's actually relying on me to do something in this world. God has faith in me that I have the capability to actually take initiative. And that can be intimidating and maybe even sometimes overwhelming. Rivka Esther, hello.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you. I mean, what happened? We're like 4 times more than usual. I'm delighted. Please stay. It's phenomenal course. I feel like we're only 2 parshiot into the Kriyat Torah, and we are completely immersed in exactly this, where God is making a decision. We're going to have a two-way relationship. We make a decision. No, but we know how to do this better, and how he goes back and forth between how much responsibility am I actually going to give them until he makes the decision after the flood. Like I said, two parshiot in between Adam v'Chava, the Cain, the Noach, and Migdal Bavel. It's all we're talking about. We're talking about God reaching for us and us reaching for God, and how we have that dual relationship.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll say more than that. For those of you that are interested, I have a WhatsApp that I send out every week on some thoughts on the parsha. I can send the link if you want onto the chat afterwards. But there I wrote about the idea of grit, of the development. I haven't sent it out yet. I'll be sending it out tomorrow. The development of grit from Noach to Lech Lecha. And it's fascinating because if we look in Parshat Noach, there's a unilateral Brit, where the Brit Noach is essentially the rainbow, which, by the way, is a bow, an instrument of war that's turned on its head, it's turned inside out to be a sign of peace, where God is essentially saying violence is not going to work in order to bring about plurality, because each color has its own individual kind of arc, and then together it creates this unity. And then we have a new Brit in Parashat Lech Lecha, and that is a unilateral Brit. That is a bilateral Brit, right? That is a Brit whereby God is actually asking man to do something. Brit ben Abatarim, Abraham has to cut the carcasses. Brit Milah, okay, it requires, and the path of righteousness, justice, of Sedek v'Mishpat that Abraham has to go on, it requires a two-way dimension. And this, by the way, is exactly what Rabbi Sachs speaks about. In all of his books, he is going to be calling us in modern language, and that's what we're going to see is so brilliant, okay? He's going to be turning to us and saying to us, now, God created you in freedom, and that freedom means that God took a chance. He took a chance on you. And the question is, are you going to recognize that God has got faith in you, that you are going to stand up for that. You're going to actually rise to the challenge. You're going to rise to God's belief in you. If we think every morning we say, and I'm sure many of you have heard this beautiful parshanut, which I think is so profound. Number one, the idea that the rabbis immediately before any positive psychology centuries ago, they understood that the first thing we need to do every single morning is to express gratitude. Okay, just shows the brilliance of the rabbinic mind centuries before positive psychology became a thing. Okay, you wake up in the morning, show gratitude, because gratitude allows me to frame my narrative, to frame my day in a certain way. But there's something much more profound in Modeh Ani, and that is that as much as we proclaim our belief in God, okay, I'm grateful to you, God, and you've given us every. At the end, it depends again where you put the comma, but many people say the comma is temla, right? Sick, comma, rabba emunatecha, which is God's had great belief in you, in us, in humans. Now, to affirm that every morning, halavai as a parent, I could do that for my child, and I admit I've not ticked that box of being able to do that every morning with my kids. Instead, there's often the screaming, "Why have you got your thing ready? Why have you got this?" Right? But parents, to be able to send your kids away every single morning and say to your kids, "I believe in you. I believe you can do something with your day. I believe you have the character, the strength, the resilience, the I don't know, the talent to make something out of this world, out of the circumstances you're given, right? Imagine if we could send our kids off every day with that message. Okay, that's what we do for ourselves. That's what the rabbis did for us by saying that God has faith in us. And that's what Rabbi Sachs is saying. Faith is not just unilateral, it's bilateral. It's knowing that we have faith in God to help us, but only when we help ourselves, right, does God help us, meaning it has to be a two-way. It's grit, it's covenant. Okay, so that's the second radical idea of Rabbi Sachs, which we're going to see come up again and again and again. The third is the idea of purpose. And this, for me, by the way, today more than ever, I think is so, so important. We know that humans, and by the way, we don't need religion to tell us that. We know from, for example, people like Noah Yuval Harari, who is a total atheist, okay, and he's written in many of his books, humans are meaning-seeking animals. Okay, Viktor Frankl, who, by the way, was also an atheist, okay, and he spoke about the idea of the greatest thing we can do in our life is to bring meaning. So even people who don't believe in God understand how important meaning is for us as human beings in the world. Look at what Rabbi Sachs says. The meaning of life is the realization that you are held in the arms of a vast presence. You are not abandoned. You are here because you were meant to be. It is the sense that life is something you may have been given so that you live with a feeling of gratitude and you seek to give back, to pay it forward, to be a blessing to others. This presence in which you live knows you better than you know yourself. So it is no use pretending to be what you are not, or denying your shortcomings, or justifying your mistakes, or engaging in self-pity, or blaming others. Okay, all of those things we could unpack sentence by sentence. We're not going to, but every single one of those, by the way, is so important to Rabbi Sachs's for general philosophy. Okay, the idea of blaming others, the idea of victimhood in almost every single book, his later books, there is a chapter that touches on the idea of victimhood. He really believed that victimhood was the I would even say the thorn in the side of our human development, right? If we look at ourselves as victims, we are going to fall prey to not being able to have belief in ourselves, okay? It is a loving, forgiving, but challenging presence, demanding much, but never more than you can do. Now, again, I love that. Demanding much, but never more than you can do. It's a really, really important thing to remember. It asks you to give your best, not for the sake of reward, but because that is what you are here on earth to do. Now, that last sentence to me is a sentence I come back to very, very often. There are two ways to look at our relationship with God. There is the quid pro quo way, which says I put something in to get something out, which says, I do the mitzvot in order to get olam haba, in order to get the world to come, which says, I keep the laws and the commandments so that my life is good and that I get good from God, okay? And in many ways, for Rabbi Sacks, that's a very childish way of understanding our relationship with God. It's kind of the lowest level. And here he matches what the Rambam says, okay? The much higher level for Rabbi Sacks, and really for him, what religion really is meant to be, is the idea that we have been given a mission, and as human beings, we need to respond to a call. And responding to that call allows us to find meaning, not even just to find meaning, to really have meaning in our lives. And it allows us to understand, exactly as he said, that we are being held in the arms of a vast presence. And when we know that that is the case, going back to the idea of imun, of belief in, we know that God believes in us and it allows us to do good in the world. And this is really a central idea, a really central idea for Rabbi Sacks. I'm going to continue to the next slide. Now I want us to speak about his biography. Okay, so far we've spoken really about this idea of the different ideas in Rabbi Sacks. Oh, very briefly, I'm going to do this super fast. It's important. It's not that important, but I really want us, there's one particular thing in his biographical timeline that I want us to focus on. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through it pretty quickly. He's born in 1948. He always took pride in the fact that he was born the same year as the State of Israel. He's born in London. His parents were Louise and Libby. Louisa Libby Frimkin, okay, Sachs. They lived for a while in the East End. His father sold fabric in the East End. I identify with that. My father also sold fabric in the East End, and I spent a lot of my childhood days there. And he has three other brothers. Yes, three other brothers. He was one of four brothers, Brian, Alan, and Elliot, who all now live in Israel. From 1952 to 1959, he attends St Mary's Primary School in North London. In 1959, he goes, again, just to note, he doesn't go to Jewish schools. That's really important. In 1959 to 1966, he attends Christ College, as you can hear from the name of the place. Also in Finchley, even though half the students there are Jewish, it is a non-Jewish institution. 1966, he entered the University of Cambridge. I want to just make a note that his parents were traditional British Jews. Now, I don't know how many people on this Zoom are from the UK or from America or from wherever else. British Jewry is very unique. Okay, that it has a unique history and it has a very unique denominational makeup. And what we have in Britain, specifically in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, is what we call, and by the way, still today, is what we call traditional United Synagogue Jewry. Traditional United Synagogue Jewry are Jews who see themselves as Jews, but they don't necessarily place on themselves a denominational category. Okay, in America, we have in the 1960s and 70s Reform and Conservative and Orthodox and Modern Orthodox and all of these denominational categorizations. In Britain, we have less of that. There is Reform Judaism in Britain. It's definitely there. There is Conservative Judaism less than in America. But we also have a very unique category, and that is what we call traditional Jews. What are traditional Jews? Traditional United Synagogue is kind of the umbrella organization of various shuls, various Beit Knesset synagogues in England that fall under this umbrella organization of United Synagogue. United Synagogue Jews are anything from Jews who are Orthodox, okay, probably mostly modern Orthodox, to Jews who are not Orthodox at all and come to shul 3 times a year, maybe even once a year, okay? And it's all different types of Jews that come together. Traditional United Synagogue Jewry are people who, for example, would go to shul Shabbat morning and would watch the football or go to the football Shabbat afternoon. They didn't keep halacha in the way that we would say an Orthodox Jew would keep halacha, okay, but they saw and identified themselves as I don't know if they would say strictly observant Jews, as traditional observant Jews, okay? That's what Rabbi Sacks's family were. They were, I think they were all, they were observant. Sorry, Rabbi Sacks's family were observant, but they were definitely part of this kind of United Synagogue identification. He then goes to the University of Cambridge and studies philosophy and moral science. In 1967, this is what's super important for us to know. 1967 is a pivotal moment in Rabbi Sacks's life when and we're gonna see it because he at length talks about it in the book we're gonna do now, where the 1967 war does something, pivots his Jewish identity from kind of more of a passive identity to an active identity. In 1968, while he's still a student at Cambridge University, he goes on a 2-month visit to the United States, and he has life-changing encounters with Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik and with Lubavitcher Rebbe. He sums these encounters up by saying the Rebbe challenged me to lead and Rabbi Soloveitchik challenged me to think. And essentially, I mean, it's a process, but essentially, ultimately, at the time before he went, he was going to follow a trajectory of academic professorship and, kind of the ivory tower of academia. In 1969 and onwards, he begins to think about giving back to the Jewish community and becoming a rabbi. In 1969, he's rewarded a degree in moral science at Cambridge University, and he also gets a fellowship. In 1970, he begins researching moral philosophy under Philippa Foot. For those of you that know any philosophy, you'll know she's a very, very well-known British philosopher. So he goes to Oxford. 1970, he marries Elaine Taylor. They have 3 children, Joshua, Dina, and Gilla. In 1971, and again, I'm just going through here, he's just to show you how quickly he made it up the academic ladder. He's appointed lecturer, and by the way, this is before he even gets his doctorate. He's appointed lecturer of moral philosophy at Middlesex Polytechnic. In 1972, he earns a master's in moral philosophy. In 1973, he is appointed a lecturer at Jews College is now, it's known as London School of Jewish Studies, LSJS, but it's the world's oldest rabbinical seminary. It was a very prestigious college in Britain, very, very well known. In 1982, and by the way, he gets that before he even has his doctorate. In 1982, he is appointed to the Chief Rabbi Lord Jacobowitz Chair in Modern Jewish Thought at Jews College. In 1980, oh, sorry, I've skipped, sorry. In 1976, he receives rabbinical ordination from Jews College and Yeshiva Etz Chaim in London. Again, he's doing all of this while he's also writing his PhD. 1978, he becomes the rabbi of Golders Green Synagogue. In 1981, he receives his doctorate in collective responsibility. Now, note what the subject matter of his doctorate is, because it is going to be so important for us, especially when we look at his final book, Morality. You're going to see how the beginning of his academic career and the end of his career literally come full circle. He begins writing about collective responsibility for his doctorate, and at the end, his book, Morality, is essentially all about collective responsibility. In 1982, he's appointed chief rabbi chair in modern Jewish thought at Jews College. In 1983, he becomes the rabbi of the very prestigious Marble Arch Synagogue in central London. 1984, he's appointed principal of Jews College. Again, just watch how quickly he climbs up that ladder. In 1991, he is then appointed as the chief rabbi of the Hebrew congregation in the Commonwealth. Now, again, I want to note his appointment was not without controversy. He did not come from a rabbinical family. He did not even go to a Jewish school. There were people who said that he wasn't grown enough, so to speak, and didn't come from a prestigious enough legacy to take the chair, but there were plenty of people that said yes. In 1998, he's named the visiting professor of theology at King's College, etc., etc. Okay, I can't even see this myself. Let's make this a little bit bigger because I actually can't see what I've written here. Okay, in 2013, he steps down as the chief rabbi. He's succeeded by Rabbi Ephraim Mervis, and then he begins to teach at in America, in Yeshiva University, etc., etc. I've really messed this up. Hold on, let's just go backwards. I don't know what I've done. Okay. He gets many prizes, including the Templeton Prize, and then on 7th of November 2020, he passes away. Okay. A few biographical anecdotes. Alan Sachs, his brother, said that when he used to go to the seaside, for example, at age 16, he's got a picture of him at the seaside dressed in formal attire. And he said Jonathan wasn't like our friends or other siblings. He never played cricket or football. He was occupied in debating politics. From a very young age, he saw himself as an intellectual and would wear a suit for school. These were the 60s in Britain, but Jonathan didn't grow his hair long like other teenagers, though he did listen to the Beatles. So we can already see that he was slightly different. You know, he was on that track to kind of this intellectual aspiration. I want to read with you what he says about his father. My father was a simple man who lived My father was a simple man who lived by simple truths. He had a hard life. He came to the West as a child fleeing from persecution, and he had to leave the school at age of 14 to support his family. When I was young, I used to ask him many questions about Judaism, and his answer was always the same. Jonathan, he used to say, I didn't have an education, and so I don't know the answers to your questions, but one day you will have the education I missed, and you will teach me the answers. Could anyone have been given a greater gift than that? He was a proud Jew and he wanted his children to go further than he could along the path of faith. And I really believe that in many ways his book, Radical Then, Radical Now, which we're going to read, I believe that in many ways that book is actually the answer to his younger self. That Rabbi Sachs wished he could have had that book when he was younger. And we'll talk about that as we go on. This is also very important. He tells the story that when they were once on holiday in a coastal town in the south of London, it was Shabbat, and they'd left the synagogue and were rushing out, and behind us, another member of the congregation came rushing up and pointed to the yarmulke, to the kippah that I was wearing. He said to my father, your son's forgotten to take his kippah off. This was in the days when it was not done to wear overt signs of your Jewishness in public. The old dictum, be a Jew at home and a man in the street, was still in force. By walking down the road with my head covers, I was committing solecism. And our friend from the synagogue assumed, not unnaturally, that I was unaware of it. He meant it kindly. He'd simply trying to save me from embarrassment, much as if my shirt tail had been hanging out. But for once, my father got angry and replied, no child of mine will ever be ashamed to be a Jew in public. And we continued on our way. It was not a very tactful response, but it taught me, as perhaps no more formal lesson could ever, not to be ashamed of who I was. And I really, really believe that that was a formative experience in Rabbi Sacks's life. And we see it. We see it in all of his writings, that one of his manifestos is really, really to wear Judaism as a badge of pride. He also speaks about the Six-Day War, which we're going to talk about. I'm not going to read it now. Again, I'm going to send you this as once everyone's on the group, or even not, I can send it to Matan to send it out. I'm going to send it to you as a PDF, this PowerPoint. He also speaks here very openly about himself, and I want to read it. He says, I have a persistent lack of belief in myself. There's some kind of pain, which is perhaps an inherited thing. There's a sadness in Jewish music, a kind of minor key that I heard when I was 2 or 3 years old. It's an existential sadness that I can't eliminate however hard I try. That's probably what allows me to communicate with people who are unhappy. Elaine, his wife, is the balance in everything. When I was going through difficult times as a chief rabbi, she was stable. It's not easy being the child of somebody in the public eye, and she was the source of strength and confidence that our 3 children needed. Elaine is joyous, positive, always finding the good in people. She is the world's finest antidepressant. Now, again, what we see here, and it's a very, very candid interview. If you're interested, you can find it here. It's a very candid interview where Rabbi Sachs essentially turns around and says, listen, I suffer from depression. But Elaine, and he speaks about Elaine, and here I'm going to read to you from the TED Talk. Elaine is the person who allows me to exit my own self, like to exit just that feeling that I know is indicative of a certain key. He uses this idea of music, of a certain key that I'm hearing, and to hear other sounds outside of that. He talks about his marriage. He says, once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was a 20-year-old undergraduate studying philosophy. I was into Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Sartre and Camus. And by the way, it's not by chance. I'm going to talk about this existentialism. That existentialism touches Rabbi Sachs, because I think he identifies very strongly with many of the existentialists and the existentialist school of thought, which we'll talk about as we go on for those of you that are not familiar with what that is. He says, I was full of ontological uncertainty and existential angst. It was terrific. I was self-obsessed and thoroughly unpleasant to know, until one day I saw across the courtyard a girl who was everything that I wasn't. She radiated sunshine. She emanated joy. I found out her name was Elaine. We met, we talked, we married, and 47 years, 3 children, it's 47 years, 3 children, 8 grandchildren later, I can safely say it was the best decision I ever took in my life. And this is the important part. He says, because it's the people not like us that make us grow. And that is why I think we have to do just that. Now, what he's saying here, and it's going to be a very important part of his philosophy, and this is where I really think to understand not just who he was, but to understand the schools of thought that influence him is super important to understand his general philosophy. Rabbi Sachs is what we call a communitarian philosopher. That is, his belief is that every single one of us, we do not exist as free floating atoms. We do not exist as a simple a self detached from things that make us into who we are. All of us are what he calls, or what communitarian philosophy calls, encumbered self. All of us are born into certain conditions, and all of us are born into certain relationships, and all of us are born into certain historical contingencies. And those things, whether we like it or not, those things define us. And therefore, the question always has to be, what do I do with those relational ties? How do I navigate them? How do they define me? How do I use them in order to bring something good to the world? And Rabbi Sachs very much believed that the way in which we are formed is through our relationships. I believe that Rabbi Sachs could be defined as a dialogical philosopher. That is a philosopher that understands the self through relationship to the other, through dialogue. Now, if we're going to look, and we're going to look at many different elements of Rabbi Sachs over the year, we're going to see where this dialogical philosophy comes, or how it comes through his writing. And we see that it's important because for him, his own self, his own formation of self is kind of done through his encounter with others, through his encounter with Elaine, pushes him outside of this existential angst, okay? Through his encounter with Jewish history, which is, we'll see it when we get there, but with the 6-Day War and how that formed him at that moment, with his encounter with others, with other faiths, with other people, with other texts, with other opinions, okay? All the time he believes he is being formed by something outside the self. And again, there's a few pivotal moments that he speaks about where he talks about this idea of, where again, here he talks about this idea of being pulled outside the self. Now, this particular anecdote comes from his book, Morality. In his book, Morality, the chapter is called Self-Help, and he is critical of the idea of self-help. He says, I love self-help books, but self-help only takes you to one point. You cannot help yourself. Sometimes you need someone to come and show you something outside of yourself. If we become prisoners of the self, we never see outside parochialism of our own existence. And he gives the story of when he was drowning. He said his parents never taught him how to swim, and on his honeymoon he went to somewhere where there was water, there was the sea, and he said it looked very, very shallow. And he decided he was going to go and just dip his feet in the water. And all of a sudden, he had a dip in the ground, and he realized that he was drowning. He says, as far as I can reconstruct the moment in my memory, I had already reconciled myself to drowning when someone, seeing me thrashing around, swam, overtook, hold me, and brought me to the shore. He deposited me almost unconscious at the feet of my wife. I was too shocked to do or say anything. I never found out his name. Somewhere out there is a man to whom I owe my life. It changed my life forever. Years afterwards, I would wake in the morning conscious of the fact that but for a miracle, I would not be here. Somehow that made everything easier to bear. Our life has had difficult times. It has been moments of crisis. Public life is full of stresses, and not everyone who lives it has a thick skin. People often ask me, how do you bear it? The answer is simple. That day on an Italian beach, I learned that life, which I so nearly lost, had been given back to me. It's difficult to be depressed when you remember fairly constantly that life is a gift. Okay, and again, what we see there is that he shows us how the person outside of him, outside of his self, was the person that saved him. There's a few other anecdotes that are worth reading. But I'm going to skip some of them. The only one I do want to read with you, which I think is very, very important, is about his meeting with Rav Soloveitchik. I'm trying to do it so that you can see it. Second. Okay, here we go. It's in the Great Partnership. He says like this: Rabbi Soloveitchik, formidably erudite in every branch of philosophy, spoke about the need to create a new kind of Jewish thought, based not on philosophical categories, but on halakha, Jewish law. Law was the lifeblood, the DNA of Judaism, and it was more than mere regulation of conduct. It was a way of being in the world. Jewish philosophy in the past had based itself on Western counterpart, and in doing so had failed to express what was unique about Judaism. I want you to note this. One of the I think, the major contributions of Rabbi Sacks to the world of Jewish philosophy is the way in which he envisions the idea of the universal and the particular. We always ask questions in Judaism about how can we have particular laws and why are they important? In other words, and I'm sure these are questions that you hear maybe from your kids, and maybe you ask yourself, why is it so important for me to keep halacha? Why is it so important for me, the classic rendition of it, not to tear toilet paper on Shabbat? Why is it so important for me to know the ins and outs of every stipulation about kashrut? Why are these things important? There's a bigger picture, right? Judaism is much bigger than all those stipulations. And Rabbi Sacks, of all people, is about big Judaism. If I was going to define Rabbi Sacks in one word, I would say big Judaism. But Rabbi Sacks never compromises on halakha. And what we're going to talk about as we go on, Rabbi Sacks was super traditional. He was super conservative with a small c about halachic observance. Why? Because for Rabbi Sacks, to maintain our particularity is the only way in which we can the only way in which we can bring the particular messages of Judaism to the world. If we negate our particular identity, our particular set of laws, our particular connection with God, our particular religion, our particular nationality, our particular peoplehood, then we will have nothing to bring to the world. We will not have a universal message to mankind. So for Rabbi Sacks, we had to have both. And where does he learn that from? He says it. Rav Soloveitchik teaches him that what is unique about Judaism is specifically the lifeblood, the law as the lifeblood, as the DNA of what Judaism is. Okay. For 2 hours, he spoke with intellectual passion and depth far beyond anything I had experienced in Cambridge. My encounter with Rabbi Schneerson was unlike any other. The first half of our conversation proceeded conventionally. I asked him questions, he gave me answers. Then, unexpectedly, he reversed the roles and started asking me questions. How many Jewish students were there in Cambridge? How many were actively identified with Jewish life? What was I doing for them? This was something for which I wasn't prepared. I was on a private intellectual quest with no larger intention. I was interested in my Jewish identity, not that of others. I began my reply with a typical English evasion. In the situation in which I find myself, the Rebbe allowed the sentence to go no further. You do not find yourself in a situation, he said. You place yourself in a situation. And if you placed yourself in one, you can place yourself in another. We were losing Jews, he said, and each of us had a responsibility to do something about it. Years later, I summed up that moment by saying how wrong people were to think of him as a leader with thousands of followers. A good leader, I said, creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. The Rebbe created leaders on a scale unprecedented in Jewish history. These were life-changing encounters. Rabbi Soloveitchik challenged me to think. Rabbi Schneerson had challenged me to lead. And I want to say that Rabbi Sacks did exactly the same thing for his students, for his so-called followers. He really challenged them to lead. If we're looking at Rabbi Sacks and his philosophy, I believe this is something I made myself. So I can't claim that it's 100% accurate, but I really, after many, many years of studying him and really reading all his stuff inside out, I really believe that these are the three prongs. I'm trying to do it so you can see it properly. These are the three prongs of Rabbi Sacks's thought, three pillars of Rabbi Sacks's thought. And they are the idea of freedom, responsibility, and covenant. Why do I think these are so important in Rabbi Sacks's thinking? Because Rabbi Sacks, let's not forget, he is a child of Enlightenment philosophy, okay? He was brought up in the 1960s. He went to Cambridge. He never gives up on the profundity and the richness and the wisdom of the Western liberal tradition. Okay, and that is a tradition that reveres human freedom, human autonomy. The idea that we are all so-called equal, and we'll talk about this as we go on, but equal and free and autonomous beings that have the ability to act in this world. Listen to what he says. And again, I go back to this idea. Rabbi Sacks doesn't just bring this because it's a Western liberal idea. He brings it because he believes it is at the heart of the Bible, of the biblical imagination. He says for the Hebrew Bible, there's a difference between freedom and a free society. Hebrew contains many words for freedom, but two have particular significance, chofesh and cherut. Chofesh means individual freedom, what Isaiah Berlin called negative liberty. It is what a slave acquires when he or she goes free. They are no longer subject to someone else's orders. They can do what they like. Freedom in this sense can never be an adequate basis for free society. Now, what Rabbi Sacks does is brilliant. Rabbi Sacks says like this: there is a problem in society today. In fact, let me finish reading and then I'm going to actually stop share because we're going to do the rest of them next week. I'm going to finish reading. He says, where are we? He says, freedom in this sense can never be an adequate basis for a free society for an obvious reason. Sooner or later, my freedom will conflict with yours. If I am free to steal, you are not free to own. If I am free to attack, you are not free to walk without fear. Freedom for the pike means death to the minnows. A society based on chofesh, which is today called a libertarian society, will be one in which the strong will prevail over the weak, the many over the few, the powerful over the powerless. In the Exodus, the Israelites acquired their chofesh, negative liberty. They were no longer slaves. They were not yet a free society. At Sinai, they acquired cherut, their constitution of liberty as a nation. I want to explain to you, you may have read this. In fact, I'm sure many of you, or at least those of you that read Rabbi Sacks, especially on the Parsha, you probably read this before. But I want to explain to you here, and with this we're going to finish, I want to explain to you here the underpinning. What is propelling Rabbi Sacks to say this? Rabbi Sacks, and I believe that this was his brilliance, Rabbi Sacks came from two worlds. He came from the world of Enlightenment philosophy and the Western liberal imagination. But he also came from the world of traditional orthodoxy, of the Talmud and the Bible, etc., etc. Yes, thank you, Tamar. Absolutely true. The US election happening today, we're not going to have time to go there, but there's so much to say on that, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Not just the US election, but what's happening in America today, where people's so-called freedom, one person's freedom is one person's freedom of speech, so to call at least the belief in freedom of speech, is curbing another person's freedom. Okay, freedom of movement or freedom of liberty. But what Rabbi Sacks was doing here, and this is his brilliance, is he takes the Bible, he takes particularly Jewish messages, and he uses them as a commentary for the dangers of the Western liberal ideas. And then he takes Western liberal ideas and uses them as a commentary for the dangers of religious fundamentalism. He all the time, he is taking different things from different places and using them to create a social commentary and a religious commentary against the dangers of any system. Okay, and by the way, we're going to see this as well. Those of you that were with me last year, we saw it very clearly when we read Not in God's Name. It was a very difficult book. It was an especially difficult book to learn last year. We're not going to learn it this year, obviously, because we did it last time. But when you read Not in God's Name, which is essentially a polemic against religious fundamentalism, what Rabbi Sacks does is, I think, unprecedented. It's a book, not just for Jews, it's a book for non-Jews, essentially, many non-Jews. And it is saying to them that there are many, many dangers in religion. And that is that religion can become fundamentalist. But what does he do? He brings the Bible the Bible as a source, in order to show religious people that the Bible actually comes out against religious fundamentalism. And then he brings in certain ideas from Western liberal philosophy and shows them how those ideas merge together with the biblical narrative in order to produce a critical commentary against religious fundamentalism. And in another place, for example, and by the way, this is something we're going to see when we look at morality. When we look at the book Morality, we're going to see this massively. The book Morality is a polemic against the dangers of liberty, of libertarianism, of the liberal Western legacy. What happens when, exactly what he says here, when we take the idea of freedom to its extreme? What happens is we have a society in which people actually are no longer free. We have a society in which we uphold negative liberty, my freedom, my rights, my right to do whatever I want to do. But we've forgotten, we have freedom, but we don't have liberty. Liberty is when I impose boundaries, or self-impose, when a society imposes boundaries on people's freedom in order to protect long-term liberty. And Rabbi Sacks brilliantly reads this out from the Torah text, from the book of Exodus. And he says as follows: the Torah, already centuries and centuries before Western liberal democracy came to be, warned us that there is a danger with freedom. There is a danger with liberalism. And that danger is very simple. You want freedom? It's great. You can be a free individual, but you can't have millions of free individuals doing whatever they want and demanding rights in a society. Because what I want is going to contradict what you want. So what do you have to do? You can't just be free from. You can't just have negative liberty from coercion. You also have to have freedom too. You have to know what we want society, what are the values we're working towards, what are the common goods that we have, what is the direction we're taking. And once we formulate what the values and the principles, what our common ground is, then we can impose certain frameworks that we self-impose, because we all choose it, that curb our individual rights and liberties, or as I should say, individual freedoms, in order to respect the long-term journey towards a society that is really free for everybody. Now, it's a very, very complex web of moving and navigating different arenas and different areas. And that's why, by the way, we have policymakers and many other things. But there's a huge danger. And we see what is happening in America today is that so many people have bought into the idea of rights and freedoms and group rights. We've forgotten what the big picture is. We've forgotten what liberty really means. And when that happens, society becomes uncontrollable. There's total chaos. And this is what we're seeing unfold. And Rabbi Sacks says the Torah knew that. So it frees the people from slavery. It gives them freedom from totalitarian dictatorship and slavery. But it's not enough. We have the freedom, but we're in the wilderness. And the wilderness represents this liminal space between freedom from and freedom to, between negative liberty and positive liberty. When do we get our positive liberty? We get it at Sinai, when we receive the Torah. And when are we able to apply that positive liberty? When we go into the land of Israel. That's our positive liberty. That is formation of society. Now, we're going to unpack all of these ideas in Rabbi Sacks, but that's just an example to show you how one of the pillars of his understanding of the human being and our relationship to God and the world is the importance of freedom, but not just chofesh, heirut, not just freedom from, but freedom to. He bases it on the Bible, on the Torah text, and he bases it on his conception, his understanding, his wisdom of the secular Enlightenment philosophy. He brings them together and it's just brilliant. With that, I'm going to finish. I'm going to go back and say this class, today, I basically spoke most of the time. What we're going to be doing as time goes on next week, we're going to come back together. I'm going to very briefly finish the introduction. We're going to jump already into the book. Now, I'm going to presume that many of you may not have bought the book. Many of you are still ambivalent about or haven't decided whether you're going to take the course or not. That's fine. You have another week to decide. If you know that you definitely want to take the course, I encourage you to please, please go and buy the book. It's not an expensive book. It's one of the cheaper ones. It's very thin. Buy the book, start reading it. Okay, part of the group is to really be reading. If you're not sure you want to continue, I will share parts of the book. We will share it together and we will discuss it together next week. But I'm going to set the book out for you next week. We're going to talk about it. We're going to understand the context, why Rabbi Sacks wrote it, what the book is trying to do, what's the agenda, why he's doing it. And then we're going to start delving into different areas of it and discuss it. The book is Radical Then, Radical Now. In America, it was published as a letter in the scroll. Next week, we'll discuss why it was called a letter in the scroll, but it's called Radical Then, Radical Now. That's the book.
It's available here, actually, Tanya, as a letter in the scroll. It's sold at Pomerantz as a letter in the scroll.
Amazing. Okay, so Pomerantz sells it. I think you can also maybe even purchase it online. Please, if you have decided to be in this class and you've registered, I would love you to, I will send another email out with a link to the class WhatsApp. It's super important that you join that. It's only me sending messages. We're not going to bombard you. The reason for that is because I will want to send you, for example, already today, I want to send you a brilliant video about interviewing Rabbi Sacks about the trajectory of his life, which I think is really worth watching. I'm going to be sending you a lot of videos, a few articles, various other things. It's just the easiest way to do it. So I encourage you, if you are going to register for the class, to please make sure that you ask the Matan office for the link to the WhatsApp group and join. Thank you all so much. Please God, it should be a good week, a safe week.
Thank you very much.
A week of only good news. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Wonderful to see all of you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tanya, I
Thank
only
you.
got your
Thank
message
you.
on the phone. I did not get it through mail. And I registered about a month
Okay,
ago.
so let me just tell you that the link to the class is on the Matan website. You literally just need to go to the Matan website, and as you go into the website, immediately you're going to see links to the first 2 weeks of the classes. Every class has a link, which is totally accessible. You just click on the link and you'll be able to come into the class.
It wasn't separate. It was add to the cart. I came to all kinds of things, but I didn't.
Yeah.
No, you don't need to do that. You just have a link to the first 2 weeks on the Matan website. As you enter the website, click on it and it will give you a link to all the classes.
Tanya,
Okay, thank you.
can you send on WhatsApp all the books that we're going to be reading? I registered for
Yes,
either, and it would be very helpful
100%.
for me to see what I already have and what I need to.
Sure, with pleasure. I will put that on the group 100%.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.